I got to meet flat old Baldy in 2019 when I spoke in person in New Jersey to you folks. And so I appreciate that your interest in this farm still remains with the second book coming out. So thank you. So let's get right at it. Let's move to Spangler Book Two. I argue in both books that George Spangler owned the most important farm militarily in the Battle of Gettysburg. This farm was absolutely critical to George Meade's win, and I emphasize that in all of my talks. So I'm going to start with that tonight. I'll follow that with people stories from the two major hospitals on Spangler property, including some bonus new research on the last 3 days of Confederate Brigadier General Lewis Armistead's life, which were spent on the Spangler's farm. And as many of you old Baldy notes and folks know, the George Spangler farm, as you can see on the map, if you can see it on the map, is south of Gettysburg. And you can see the farm inside the red circle. And then just above the farm is the blue star. That, for reference point, is today's modern day visitor center. So if you were in the visitor center and were to walk out the door, walk down the hill on that sidewalk, that big sidewalk, keep going on that sidewalk past the big parking lots on your left, keep going on the sidewalk, get to the end of the sidewalk. When you've come to the road, look both ways, safely cross the road, walk into the tree line on the other side. Welcome to the 1863 northern boundary of the George Spangler farm. So that's how close it was to what is now the visitor center. As you can see, that farm dominated the countryside behind the line. It was 166 acres. It was close to the left flank and Little Round Top, that's shown on the map, close to the center of the line, close to the right flank, and Culp's Hill. Then there are the roads. Granite Schoolhouse Lane cuts through Spangler as shown by the blue arrow. Blacksmith Shop Road is marked by the blue X's. Both go directly to the battlefield and connect the Baltimore Pike and Taneytown Road, the two main arteries. With the Spangler farm, Union commanders had the size, location, and roads needed to hold massive amounts of infantry and artillery close by in reserve and get those reserves to the line quickly and often just in time. This was a farm that could help win a battle. And this map shows how George Meade used the Spangler farm. This farm was packed. Most followers of Gettysburg know very well the common story of Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine rushing to Little Round Top just in time to help save the day. But what they might not know is the 20th Maine got to the line and then Little Round Top just in time because they spent the day bivouacked on the east side of the Spangler farm as shown here and outside of the Spangler farm, which is on the right on the map. So they got their orders later in the afternoon on the 2nd, leave Spangler, get to the line. So part of the 5th Corps went down Granite Schoolhouse Lane. The rest of it rushed down Blacksmith Shop Road. And including the 20th Maine, you have some Philadelphia folks who spent the day of July 2nd on and next to Spangler, who were rushing to the line late in the afternoon on the 2nd. You have the 2nd Pennsylvania Reserves from Philadelphia. They rushed from Spangler to the wheat field. You have the 91st Pennsylvania from Philadelphia. They left Spangler and rushed to Little Round Top. 118th Pennsylvania, the Oak Corn Exchange Regiment from Philadelphia. They left Spangler and they went to Rose Woods. So all those guys, after they left, after the 5th Corps was gone, the 6th Corps immediately settled in at the same spaces left by the 5th Corps. But they weren't long before they got their orders to rush to the line, and the 6th Corps rushed down Granite Schoolhouse Lane in the middle of the George Spangler's farm to the line. Then later on the evening of July 2nd, a division of the 12th Corps left Culp's Hill, which would be up at the top of the screen, and that division rushed down Granite Schoolhouse Lane to the line. And your Philadelphia boy had his main street at Gettysburg, and it was a rutted old farm path that someday would be called Granite Schoolhouse Lane. So bottom right picture, if you could see it, is one artillery battery. That's how many men, horses, and wagons are required to operate 6 cannons. Now, if that's one battery, imagine that at 2 o'clock on July 2nd, there were 19 of these batteries filling Spangler's West fields and spilling off the fields. And that's where they left when they were called. They left the farm on the 2nd and 3rd. They fought at Wheatfield Road, Trossel Farm, Plum Run Line, Cadore Farm, all over Cemetery Ridge, Cemetery Hill, East Cemetery Hill, even the Spangler's own Powers Hill. Okay, now, before we move off of this, if you can see the number 10, actually toward the bottom of the map, that's the 11th Corps Hospital, which we're going to talk about in a bit. 100 ambulances were attached to this hospital. They were in George Spangler's wheat field in the middle, another wheat field up on Powers Hill, and the rest of them were on East Cemetery Hill. By the way, the ammunition train in the middle of the map arrived with the artillery reserve, and they provided all of the reserve ammunition for all the Army of the Potomac artillery trains. So on July 2nd and 3rd, batteries from all over the battlefield came to Spangler to reload. And the 4th New Jersey next to them, infantry regiment, which was a broken up regiment, they were there to guard the ammunition train, and they're from Trenton. So you have the Granite Schoolhouse Hospital up there in the middle of the farm. We're going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about Powers Hill up there where Slocum's headquarters is or was, July 1st through the 5th, right wing headquarters. You got infantry up there. You've got artillery up there. You've got a signal station up there with the flags waving and the men rushing back and forth. Meade retreated to Powers Hill when he got bombed out of the Leicester house during Pickett's charge. And then he returned to the Hill on the morning of the 4th, where he made his headquarters down by the Baltimore Pike on the morning of July 4th. Other farms saw a lot more combat than the George Spangler farm and were literally destroyed by it. But no single farm played a greater strategic and logistical role with its 2 roads, with Powers Hill, and it's in the middle of it all location than the George Spangler farm in setting up the Army of Potomac victory in the biggest battle of the Civil War. First hospital, Granite Schoolhouse. 1st Division 2nd Corps Hospital on Granite Schoolhouse Lane in the middle of George Spangler Farm treated the wounded and dying men who fought at Rose Woods, Stony Hill, and the wheat field. These were the fighters of the famous Irish Brigade. This was the Corps of Philadelphia Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, and this was a division of Father William Corby, who granted the men general absolution moments before the Day 2 battle, thus clearing their path to heaven. That statue of Father Corby on the left, by the way, stands in front of Corby Hall at the University of Notre Dame, where he went on to become president after the war. It's the same one, identical to the statue of him on the battlefield. More than 1,000 men of the 1st Division were casualties on just that one day of fighting. And by the end of the day on July 2nd, most of those wounded men were either at the 1st Division 2nd Corps Hospital in the fields and woods around Granite Schoolhouse Lane, or they were waiting to be picked up and taken there. Chaplain John Henry Wilbrand Stuckenberg, 145th Pennsylvania from Erie, said, "Our hospital was at the foot of Powers Hill. I found the doctors and nurses busily engaged with the wounded, scattered around in all directions, some lying on blankets, some on straw, a few on stretchers, others on the bare ground. It was very evident that our regiment had again suffered severely." Colonel Edward E. Cross, 5th New Hampshire, died at Granite Schoolhouse at about midnight on the night of July 2nd. A hospital worker said Cross's sufferings were so great that the colonel begged to be shot. Philly area native Brigadier General Samuel K. Zook, treated at the school on July 2nd for a chest wound that opened a hole so large that the surgeon could see the general's heart beating. He died the next day in a house farther behind the line. Both Cross and Zook predicted that they were going to die at Gettysburg. Hancock was taken to what was left of the Granite Schoolhouse Hospital after his wounding during Pickett's charge and the end of the fighting on July 3rd, before being transported further to the line, further to the rear, and then to a Philadelphia hospital on July 4th. The proximity to the Union line of this hospital offered great benefit in rushing wounded there quickly from the Wheatfield area, but it could not protect these men or the surgeons and nurses from the Confederate artillery overshots prior to Pickett's charge on July 3rd. After only 24 hours, the hospital had to be moved to safety farther behind the line. Private Robert L. Stewart, 140th Pennsylvania of Pittsburgh, shown at top middle, described the hospital's frantic evacuation from Spangler. He said, "For a few moments, the confusion and distress which prevailed was terrible beyond expression. Those who could not move were crying out for help, and many who were partially disabled were attempting to drag their maimed or helpless limbs from the plunging shot and shells." Except for a paragraph here or there, this hospital has been ignored by history for generations. So I gave it one chapter in book 1 and 2 chapters in book 2. Even so, what you're looking at is what the site of that major 1863 hospital looks like today on National Park Service land. It's an unmaintained, unmarked, overgrown woodlands and difficult and perhaps even dangerous to enter because of the thick vegetation and rough terrain. This site was an important open field to the hospital in 1863. And I marked on the map on the bottom right where I took this photo. I would even bet that most lifelong residents of Adams County could drive down Granite Schoolhouse Lane past this site with no idea that anything important happened there. Happily, though, that's about to change, at least in a small way, because a sign is going up this year on the other side of the lane that describes this hospital and its location. So after 163 years, this hospital will no longer be hidden from history. One final local note on this hospital for you folks before we move on. The 116th Pennsylvania of Philadelphia was one of the Second Corps Irish Brigade regiments that received general absolution from Father Corby before going into battle at the Wheatfield. The 116th was hit so hard at Fredericksburg that it was down to 4 companies at Gettysburg, one of which was detached as Division Provost Guard. And even with that, it still had the 3rd highest casualty rate by percentage of the 1st Division of 56.1% at Gettysburg, many of which were suffered in hand-to-hand combat. The names, by the way, of the casualties of the 116th Pennsylvania, as well as hundreds of others in the 1st Division at Granite Schoolhouse, are listed in the back of my second book, Tell Mother Not to Worry, the biggest hospital on Spangler land. All the suffering and distress I saw there was awful. The poor fellows came around us. We handed out cakes and bandages, but it went such a little ways. It made me so sorry that I had so little. Gettysburg resident Sarah Monfort. So George Spangler was 47 years old during the Battle of Gettysburg, and his wife Elizabeth was 44. They had 4 children, all living at home at the time of the battle: Harriet, 21, Sabina, 19, Daniel, 17, and Benaiah, 14. The 6 Spanglers were ordered by the 11th Corps doctors on July 1st to either leave the farm or stay together out of the way in one upstairs bedroom. So that bedroom is where they lived amid the flies and summer heat during the 5 weeks and 2 days that their home was occupied for a hospital. They also likely had a chamber pot in their room because their one outhouse was overrun by the hospital. Spanglers could leave their bedroom, but in doing so, they had to step over and around wounded and dying Union officers just to get out of their house. Army of the Potomac ambulances in 1863 were far more advanced and far superior to what the Confederates had. I hope you can see that even under the front of the wagon is a big spring. And there was one in the back too for making the load nicer, smoother in rough farm fields and in rough gravel roads. There was medicine, there was water, uh, there were other drinks, there was first aid on these ambulances. 2 to 3 men could lie down in an ambulance, and 8 could sit up in the ambulance. That white canvas on top could be pulled down around to the ground, circling the ambulance to give the ambulance workers a dry night of rest. Ambulances had usually 8 workers, and only the best men were picked. The most courageous and smart men were picked who would be willing to go into battle and collect their comrades. They were even trained to the point of how to pick up a soldier without hurting him and putting him on a stretcher, how to pick up the stretcher without hurting him, how to walk the stretcher, and then how to in turn place him in the ambulance. There were 100 ambulances attached to the 11th Corps Hospital. Normally, ambulances were placed fairly close to the fighting in the Civil War battles. Stretcher bearers stayed a little behind the line, but close enough for quick retrieval of the wounded, while ambulances waited farther back out of shell range. That wasn't the case on July 1st, when dozens of ambulances were ordered to wait along the Emmitsburg Road south of town when the Union 11th Corps went into battle north of town that afternoon. That decision would later put the ambulances at grave risk in Gettysburg when the orders finally came to rush to the line and the ambulances and Confederate fighters entangled downtown. Stretcher bearer Jacob Smith, 107th Ohio, age 23 at the time, remembered the scene years later. Just as we reached the heart of town on our way to the front, we encountered our forces falling back in confusion and disorder, filling the street so that it was an utter impossibility to make progress forward or to turn our teams about again. The enemy were close behind in hot pursuit. At this juncture, the only way left for us to escape was to tear away a couple of panels of fence between 2 houses alongside of the street and pass between the buildings and then the other way up the back street. The enemy were so near that in turning the corner back of the building, more than half of the ambulance men in our squad were captured. The enemy ordered us to halt, but by considerable effort and fast running, I succeeded in getting out of their reach and inside of our lines on Cemetery Hill. Once they reached safety, Smith and the rest of the ambulance corps started delivering 11th Corps and other wounded to the 11th Corps Hospital at about 4 p.m. on July 1st. After completing his duties that night, Smith pulled double duty and worked overnight in the Spangler barn to care for the wounded. At the hospital's peak attendance on July 4th and 5th, the Sanitary Commission and the Christian Commission both estimated there were 1,900 wounded men in the 11th Corps Hospital. And my research indicates that there were about 50 Confederates among those 1,900 men. Spangler surgeon Dr. Daniel G. Britton of Westchester said, "The wounded soon began to pour in, giving us such sufficient occupation that from the 1st of July till the afternoon of the 5th, I was not absent from the hospital more than once, and then but for an hour or two. 4 operating tables were going night and day. I never wished to see such another sight. For myself, I think I never was more exhausted." Civil War hospital conditions were so filthy that most doctors became dangerously ill. As an example, Spangler surgeon Dr. Henry Van Arnhem of the 154th New York, pictured at right, suffered at the 11th Corps Hospital with chronic diarrhea, which was aggravated if he ate the wrong food, drank bad water, stood too long, sat too long, etc. Van Arnhem was hospitalized with it in 1864 and suffered from chronic diarrhea for the rest of his life due to the war and was eventually confined to bed. One surgeon estimated there were 500 wounded and dying men crammed into the Spangler's barn. A hospital worker estimated 400. No matter the number, all of this hospital was horrific, but it was especially bad under the forebay at overhang in the front of the barn where the amputations took place and just inside the front wall in the stable, because that's where many of the worst cases awaited their surgery amid cries of agony, smells of infection, body fluids, and human feces. Cries and screams could be heard 50 yards away in the Spangler's house. Hospital workers covered their head with a pillow at night to try to drown out the sounds. Nurses read scripture and prayed with the men in an attempt to help send them on their way. Outside in the Spangler fields, the Army didn't provide enough hospital tents or bedding or food or clothes for the first several days because Meade and Hancock banned hospital wagons to Maryland to keep the roads clear for fast troop movement. This multiplied the misery of the wounded and dying men at Spangler and other hospitals who were forced to lie in the mud in the open when the thunderstorms came. Spangler hospital worker William R. Kiefer of Easton, 153rd Pennsylvania. No words can portray the pitiable condition, the more distressing because of the insufficient means immediately at hand to relieve the large number of helpless men. Spangler hospital worker James R. Middlebrook, 17th Connecticut, said, "It is enough to make one's heart bleed to witness the amputations. I feel it my duty to do all I can for them. I cannot see them suffer, shall stay as long as I can stand it. You know nothing of the horrors of war and cannot until you go and see it for yourself." Both Kiefer and Middlebrook survived the Civil War and lived long lives, though Middlebrook suffered every day for the rest of his life with the pain and discomfort of a hernia that he sustained at Chancellorsville, which they couldn't fix back then and could only try to control with a belt. In fact, Middlebrook was a hospital worker at Spangler because he had difficulty marching, carrying weight because of his hernia, thus degrading his ability to fight. Here's the forebay again. Doctors performed those surgeries and amputations here because there was more light and fresh air away from the putrid smells and packed crowds inside that barn. A surgeon could finish an amputation in 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the limb, and then move immediately to the next amputation. No washing required of bloody or germ-infested hands or bloody equipment because they didn't understand how proper sanitation could prevent infection and reduce the spread of disease. A Spangler surgeon approaching total exhaustion called the work too much for human endurance. Private William Southerton, age 19, 75th Ohio, said, "At the doorway, I saw a huge stack of amputated arms and legs, a stack as high as my head, the most horrible thing I ever saw in my life. I wish I had never seen it. I sickened." Amputated arms and limbs were thrown into containers, loaded into a wagon, and buried somewhere in a distant location on the farm. A soldier from the 17th Connecticut who was just happening by described the scene. He said, "We passed a corner of the barn, and I noticed two large barrels that stood close to the roadside. Curiosity prompted me to look into them. I was horrified to find them filled with human limbs, arms, legs, hands, and feet that had been amputated from the bodies of the brave boys in blue, that their lives might possibly be saved. I turned away with a shudder. Such is war." Still today, I will add that we still don't know where those amputated limbs are buried on the farm. This is First Sergeant Francis Strickland, 154th New York. Sergeant Strickland woke up when the chloroform wore off while his arm was being amputated July 3rd at a school-turned-hospital in downtown Gettysburg. That's the building right there in the bottom right where the amputation took place. Still in existence today on High Street and used today by the Adams County Housing Authority. The surgeons debated what to do because medical supplies were running short during the battle and decided to finish Strickland's amputation without anesthesia. "He's a grizzly dog," one surgeon said. "I guess he will stand it." Strickland did indeed stand it, recalling, "Sawing the bone was the easiest part, did not hurt near as much as tying the arteries and sewing the skin." Strickland was taken to the 11th Corps Hospital at Spangler on July 4th and placed in a tent with 7 other members of the 154th New York. He survived, but 5 of the 8 men in that tent did not. And Strickland died at a young age at 49, killed by the lung disease that he first contracted during the Civil War. Also, 19-year-old drummer Thaddeus Reynolds of the 154th New York was in such agony from lockjaw as he neared death in that tent. The doctors put him under with chloroform so at least he could die in peace. Finally, about that tent, another 154th New York soldier and Private John Paul, he died July 12th at Spangler. After his death, his wife Elmira said, "My troubles seem without end." And she moved her 4 daughters, ages 6 to 12, into other homes because she no longer had the means to support them. Elmira did bring her daughters back home a couple years after the war when she began receiving a monthly government pension. She went on to have 22 grandchildren, but of course, none of those 22 grandkids knew their grandfather, Private Paul, who sacrificed his life and future with his family at the Battle of Gettysburg. I wrote 3 chapters about this one tent, in book 2. Many soldiers didn't tell the whole story of the seriousness of their wounds in letters home from Spangler because they didn't want their family to worry. Almost always, their wife or mother was on their mind. Sergeant Henry Seas of the 82nd Ohio wrote to his brother from Spangler, "My leg was amputated just above the knee. I stood the operation very well, being under the influence of chloroform. I am very well cared for and in a fair way to get along well. I hope mother will not worry herself about me." But Sergeant Henry Seas died a week after he wrote that letter home. Private Daniel H. Purdy, age 21, 17th Connecticut, had someone write home for him from Spangler saying, "Tell mother not to worry and take good care of the children." Private Purdy died a couple of days after that. Spangler's small house had just enough room to hold the 6 Spanglers plus 4 Union officers of the rank of colonel and above, including Colonel Francis Mahler of Philadelphia, the 75th Pennsylvania, who died in the house. As a result, wounded Army of the Potomac Assistant Adjutant General Fred Stowe, son of well-known abolitionist author Harriet Beecher Stowe of Uncle Tom's Cabin fame, was placed in a 12-foot by 17-foot summer kitchen when he arrived at the farm on July 3rd. Stowe was hit above the right ear with a shell fragment during the cannonade on July 3rd, creating a gash 2.5 inches long and 1/4 inch wide. He lay at Spangler for several days while his parents desperately attempted to learn his fate and where he was, finally finding out in a story in a Maine newspaper. Stowe lived, but he would never be the same after Gettysburg. He suffered from constant headaches, struggled with alcohol abuse. Ultimately, he boarded a ship to San Francisco in 1870, made it there, but was never heard from again. "Where is my poor Fred?" Mrs. Stowe agonized. "I never forget my boy. Can a woman forget her child?" Fred Stowe was assumed dead. He was a 3rd son of the famous and patriotic Stowe family to die at a young age. Confederate Brigadier General Lewis Armistead arrived at George and Elizabeth Spangler's farm after Pickett's charge sometime between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. on July 3rd, depending on the source. Armistead arrived in an ambulance. He was removed on a stretcher and placed on the ground next to the ambulance and next to the Spangler's barn. The 11th Corps Hospital workers, Private Emery Sweeland and Private Edson Ames of the 154th New York, described Armistead's appearance as pretty bloody and covered with blood. Sweetland heard Armistead as he lay on a stretcher say, You have a man here that is not afraid to die. The Spangler property was a shoulder to shoulder mass of chaos, agony, weeping, and screaming when Armistead arrived. Many wounded from Pickett's charge were pouring in as overwhelmed surgeons desperately tried to find who could be saved with immediate attention. Even so, the arrival of the Confederate general turned heads, and a crowd of gawkers formed around Armistead's stretcher, circling him. The crowd was eventually broken up when Dr. Van Arnhem arrived at Armistead's side and ordered that he be carried away for treatment. So Armistead was placed in the summer kitchen with Stowe because of the hospital staff's respect for him and his rank, even though he fought for the enemy. Combined with Stowe, the summer kitchen, where the Spanglers did their cooking, baking, canning, etc., hosted the two most famous names in this hospital. This is where Armistead was placed in the summer kitchen, on the floor, just inside the door, where I placed the Confederate flag on this slide, is also where he died on July 5th. But First Lieutenant Thomas C. Holland of the 28th Virginia was unhappy with Armistead's care. Holland was wounded in the face at the end of Pickett's charge and was also taken to Spangler, where he monitored Armistead, complaining later. Armistead was taken to the 11th Corps Hospital, where he laid across a door that every person had to step over. Being exposed in this way and an excitable man besides, he was so distressed and so uneasy that he finally died. He often begged that he might be moved from the door, but was not. After he died, Armistead was wrapped in a blanket and placed in a coffin made of wood taken from the Spangler's farm, and he was buried in their peach and apple orchard on the other side of that white picket fence, top of the photo. 1 month later, he was exhumed by an embalmer from Philadelphia, seeking to make money off his body. So Armistead was dug up again after a month in a wood coffin in the ground. His body was embalmed in whatever condition it was in, and then it was reburied. His body was dug up one more time in October when relatives paid the embalmer $125, or about $3,000 today, and reburied him in Old St. Paul Cemetery in downtown Baltimore, just a few blocks from the modern-day Orioles Park at Camden Yards Baseball Stadium. So I have confirmed and listed the names, wound, and treatment of 1,446 Union and Confederate men at the Spangler 11th Corps Hospital, and the names of 141 men who were buried in the Spangler's peach and apple orchards, all of whom are listed in Book 1, Too Much for Human Endurance. The Union men were exhumed within a few months after the battle and reburied in Soldiers National Cemetery in Gettysburg. Most Confederates other than Armistead lay in Gettysburg until 1872, when the money was raised and they were exhumed and reburied across the South. Armistead is one of 5 Confederates known to have been buried at Spangler. This Powers Hill problem is a full, good-sized chapter in Book 2. The hill was named for Solomon Powers, who operated a prosperous quarry there. George Spangler owned 3/4 of the hill and was the owner of most of the land that Powers leased. Nathaniel Leitner owned the rest of the hill. The problem with Powers Hill is it doesn't get the attention or protection it deserves for the critical role it played in winning the Battle of Gettysburg. I consider Powers Hill to be one of the 4 most important hills during the fight, along with Cemetery Hill, Little Round Top, and the 2 hills that are combined to be known today as Culp's Hill. Without the artillery on Powers Hill, the outcome of the Culp's Hill fight on the morning of day 3 is in doubt. The 14 cannons from 3 batteries on Spangler and Leitner land on top of Powers Hill played a key role in driving the Confederates back on Culp's Hill in a 6-hour fight, began on July 3rd. Without the infantry and artillery on Powers Hill, the backside of the line, the Baltimore Pike, and the artillery ammunition train on the Spangler's farm are not protected from a Confederate breakthrough. Also, and very important, of the 6 Union signal stations at Gettysburg, July 2nd and 3rd, only the Powers Hill station could see every other Army of the Potomac signal station. So it served as a central communication center and transmitted messages from centers not visible to other signal stations, including Army headquarters. And as mentioned earlier, Henry Slocum used Powers Hill for his right wing headquarters, and George Meade used it to watch the end of the battle on July 3rd and in his headquarters on July 4th. So progress has been made since the hill came under National Park Service control a few years ago. Junk cars and a house have been removed. Many acres of modern trees on the east side of the hill have been taken down, and grass has been planted. A marker explaining the fight on the hill will be placed there. Powers Hill is safe, but I would like to offer, with the understanding that the Park Service knows way more than I do, 4 suggestions to complete the job on the hill. Number 1, when you go to the visitor center and you want a map, you are handed a map there. But unlike the other 3 most important Gettysburg Hills, you won't find Powers Hill on that battlefield's official map that you receive. So you have to find it on your own and learn about it on your own. Powers Hill needs to be on the battlefield map that's handed out to visitors. Number 2, there is no sign announcing that you found Powers Hill. It just stands there alone and announced. Even the far less important Benner's Hill has a sign. Powers Hill needs a sign. Number 3, unlike the other 3 hills, access is not good. There also are no signs leading to the one dirt path up the hill. One dirt path. And once you find the path, you have to be physically fit enough to climb over 2 rock walls to reach the hill summit and artillery monuments, as shown at the top left of this slide. Finally, number 4, if you keep going past the top of the hill and get to the black oblong shape on the map on this slide, you find a garbage dump. A whole field of barrels, wire, and other trash. An entire field of disrespect that's been on this hill for decades. This hill is part of the Gettysburg battlefield. It is on National Park Service land. This hill has got to be cleaned up. This hill needs to be treated with the respect it deserves. The 11th Corps wounded continued to be sent away until the Spanglers got their farm back on August 7th, at least what was left of it. They filed 3 damage claims to the state and federal government asking for $5,000 cover what they've lost. Instead, the government awarded them only $90 out of the $5,000, and it's believed that the $90 went entirely to the Spangler's DC attorney. So they got nothing, basically. The U.S. quartermaster's agent said, the government of the United States is no more responsible for bringing on the battle fought there than it would have been had a tornado passed over that country, causing as widespread destruction as did that terrible engagement. That battle and hospital damage was his misfortune. Even so, George said they rebuilt the farm sooner than he expected, even making the house 1/3 larger and adding a bedroom in 1864. And as I said in my first talk to you folks, the Spanglers and their 4 children all went on to long and productive lives. I did not have either of these 2 photos in the first book. I looked 6 years for them. I could not find them. I didn't think they existed. Then in 2022, George and Elizabeth Spangler's 2 times great-grandson, Calvin Spangler from Kansas, walked up to me at the farm and said, Ron, is this the photo you're looking for? And that's when Maurice Spangler of Kansas got the biggest hug of his life. Happy and tight. Anyway, this photo of George and Elizabeth was taken in downtown Spangler at a professional photographer's studio. On the right is Daniel, their 3rd child, who moved to Kansas after the war and became a prominent property owner out there. This is on his wedding day with his wife, Effie. Calvin Spangler, Daniel's great-grandson, provided this photo to me. Maurice, who provided George, Calvin, who provided Daniel, are brothers. So I was happy to get those 2 new photos for me in book 2. Now, every single person in these 3 photos, every single one is a descendant of George and Elizabeth Spangler. We had a Descendants Day gathering at the farm in 2022. They came from 9 states, including California, Kansas, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont. I did genealogy research because I didn't know any of them. Not one. Who are they? Where are they? Are they out there? I did genealogy research and found them, and in 95% of the cases informed them of their connection to the farm, which they were excited to learn. Many of the Adams County descendants of George and Elizabeth Spangler literally grew up on or near the battlefield and still didn't know they were descended from this farm. Even the Gettysburg police chief did not know he was descended from the Spangler farm. At this gathering, we had 2 to 5 times great grandkids and from 7 months old to 90 years old. So the top photo is Sabina. She was the daughter who was 19 when her farm was occupied for a hospital. The 2 ladies in the blue circle are second cousins. They did not know each other until this day. And you can see they're already locked arm in arm. Things went really well this day. There was a lot of intermixing of cousins of the 3 kids. If you can see it, the gentleman in the back row in the green circle, oval, is has a foundation out in California. He came in from California for this gathering. He donated $50,000 to the Gettysburg Foundation, who owns the farm, for upkeep of the farm. And since then, I keep hearing that the foundation keeps going back to him for more donations. So he might have really gotten himself into trouble, but the foundation appreciates it. And you might not be able to see this one in the bottom right. A lady is circled, or side right. She's a 4 times great granddaughter. Even if you can't see her, she's a realtor in Pittsburgh. And when Barb and I moved to Pittsburgh about 3 years ago, she was our realtor. So of course, after all that, a Spangler descendant had to be our realtor in Pittsburgh. Okay, bottom left, those are Daniel's boys. Daniel is the number 3rd child. Maurice Spangler is on the right. He's the one that gave me George and Elizabeth. He's from Kansas. Calvin in the middle is his brother. He's the one who gave me Daniel's photo. He's from Kansas. And that's Calvin's son, Duncan, on the left. He'd be a 3 times great grandson of George and Elizabeth. Quite obviously, don't even have to say it, but those Spangler boys came from Kansas because that's where Daniel moved to, relocated to after the war. Finally, the bottom photo is right photo is Harriet, oldest child number 1, her descendants who came to this gathering. That's a mother and daughter inside that yellow circle. They are 3 and 4 times great grandkids of the Spanglers. After they found out they were descended from this farm, they were the first ones to visit it, and they were excited. Now, Benaiah, the youngest, had only 1 daughter who had only 1 son who died at a very young age. So after the daughter died in the 1960s in Gettysburg, Benaiah's line sadly ran out. Also, I did genealogy research on a few of the soldiers who died at the 11th Corps Hospital on the George Spangler farm. And I found one celebrity of note today who has an ancestor who died at Spangler. And this celebrity today does everybody recognize Woody Harrelson? TV and movie star Woody Harrelson. Harrelson is the 4 times great grandson of Private Isaac Sperry of the 73rd Ohio, shot in the chest near the intersection of the Emmitsburg and Tawnytown roads. He was taken to Spangler and died there on July 5th. The former merchant and 37-year-old Sperry was one of the oldest soldiers to die at Spangler. He was buried in Spangler's Orchard and later removed to Soldiers National Cemetery, where his first and last names are misspelled. Sperry was from Good Hope, Ohio, just 55 miles where his 4 times great grandson Woody grew up. I tried to let Harrelson know about this. I don't know if he'd care, be excited, whatever. But he has this wall of representatives that you have to get through to him, and I wasn't successful in getting through to them. So I don't know if he got the news or not. But one of his many representatives was happy to tell me that for $100,000, Woody would be happy to come to Gettysburg and speak. That has not happened. This is what the barn, summer kitchen, and the smokehouse looked like when the Gettysburg Foundation purchased the farm for $1.85 million in 2008 and saved it. There were 3 feet of manure from wall to wall in the stable of that barn. And then they raised another $3 million. And now this is what it looks like. This is what they've done with it. Thousands of visitors come to this farm each year. Leadership programs take place there, drawing hundreds of business executives from across the country to learn leadership lessons from the Battle of Gettysburg. Concert, Civil War programs take place there. High school students study the farm and its building and learn trades there. It is an 1860s showplace. What you see in that photo is how the buildings actually looked in the 1860s, though the house has been enlarged. 50% of the wood in the top floor of that barn was there in 1863. The men actually lay on that wood shoulder to shoulder. 90% of the wood in the lower floor stable was there when this hospital was there. Lots of history has been lost, but not the George Spangler Farm. The George Spangler Farm is a history success story, thanks to the Gettysburg Foundation. And it's open. I know a lot of you have been there, but for those who haven't, it's open for all to visit on summer weekends to witness a history that's been saved. So please come out if you can. Final slide. I'll leave this up here just for a second. First book is recommended by the National Park Service for anyone taking the licensed battlefield guide exam. Second book won the 2025 Batchelder Coddington Distinguished Book of the Year. So I'm very grateful. I don't know if you can see this stuff online. You can buy the book from Savas Beatty, the publisher, from Barnes & Noble, from Amazon, for the historian in Gettysburg and other stores. You could email me if anybody wants my email address. Let me know, and I can send you a signed copy of the book. They'll all be shipped for $25, including $30, including shipping. So we can talk about that later. But anyway, there are options if any of you are interested. So, old Baldy, it's good to see you again. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it.